What if I told you that the Bible we all know today might be missing critical details, stories that reshape everything we think we understand about creation, the patriarchs, and even God's divine laws? Hidden for centuries, the Book of Jubilees, a text preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, claims to reveal secret histories, forgotten commandments, and a cosmic timeline designed by God himself. But there's one problem. This book was banned from most Christians. Why? What secrets does it contain that made it too controversial for the mainstream church? Could the world have been following the wrong calendar? Was that time itself altered from its sacred, God-given structure? The forbidden origins of time. Before we get to the controversies, we need to start at the beginning, literally. The Book of Jubilees doesn't just retell the Genesis story, it expands it, revealing a hidden cosmic plan that governs all creation. According to Jubilees, when God created the world, he didn't just bring life into existence, he also established the structure of time itself. And here's where things take a radical turn. Unlike the traditional biblical calendar many cultures have followed for centuries, Jubilees introduces a sacred solar calendar that heavenly angels supposedly handed down. This calendar doesn't have the inconsistencies of the lunar system used in ancient Israel. Instead, it's a precise divine system consisting of 364 days, broken into 4 equal seasons of 91 days each. But why does this matter? Because the Book of Jubilees claims that the world abandoned this divine calendar, and by doing so, we've fallen out of sync with God's original plan. Most people think of angels as messengers or guardians, but according to the Book of Jubilees, they play a far more significant role. This text claims that angels were created on the first day of creation, and their duties weren't just to watch over humanity. Some were assigned to regulate time itself, ensuring the movement of the sun, moon, and stars remained in perfect harmony with divine law. Think about that for a second. Jubilees suggests that when people abandoned the solar calendar for a lunar one, they weren't just making a mathematical mistake. They were defying God's sacred order. This wasn't a minor issue. The text claims that humanity's failure to follow God's calendar leads to chaos, spiritual disorder, and even divine punishment. In other words, keeping time wrong isn't just a mistake, it's a sin. And here's where things get even more controversial. Was the lunar calendar a corruption of God's law? The mainstream biblical timeline follows a lunar calendar, which means months and festivals shift slightly each year. But the Book of Jubilees completely rejects this system, stating that it was a corruption introduced by people who strayed from God's divine order. According to the book, there will be those who will surely make observations of the moon, but they will disturb the seasons and make an abominable day the day of testimony. Jubilees 6:37. In other words, following the lunar calendar isn't just incorrect, it leads to spiritual confusion. The Book of Jubilees claims that by abandoning God's accurate calendar, humanity has fallen out of step with divine time. But here's the big question. Why was this solar calendar removed from mainstream teachings if it was so important? Some scholars suggest that early religious leaders suppressed the Book of Jubilees precisely because it challenged their time's widely accepted calendar systems. And remember, the calendar isn't just about counting days, it determines holy days, Sabbath observances, and festivals. If the world has followed the wrong timeline, many of our most sacred traditions might not align with God's original commandments. This alone would be enough to make Jubilees a highly controversial book, but the mysteries don't stop there. Because according to this ancient text, angels weren't just passive observers of history, they actively shaped it. And that's where things get strange. Some researchers believe that time itself was altered on purpose, and that this change wasn't just a mistake, but a massive conspiracy that has affected biblical prophecy, holy days, and even how we experience reality. And if this is true, then the implications are terrifying, because it means that most of the world has been living on a false timeline for thousands of years. But here's the real question: who changed it? And more importantly, why? The Book of Jubilees repeatedly warns that deviating from the 364-day solar calendar would lead to chaos and spiritual corruption. All the children of Israel will forget and will not find the path of the years, and they will make an error as to the months and seasons and Sabbaths. Jubilees 6:34. Yet, most ancient cultures, including the Israelites, eventually abandoned the solar calendar and switched to a lunar system. But why? Some scholars argue that this shift wasn't just a natural evolution, it was engineered. The Babylonians, known for their influence over astrology and occult, helped establish the use of the lunar calendar in the ancient Near East. The Romans later adjusted time again, leading to the Julian calendar and eventually the modern Gregorian calendar. Religious authorities, Jewish and Christian, eventually accepted these changes, despite Jubilees' warning that they would lead people astray. Now think about what this means. If the Book of Jubilees is correct and time was initially meant to be measured by 364 days, then every prophecy that depends on a precise timeline could have been thrown off course. Could key biblical prophecies about the Messiah, the end times, and the final judgment have been miscalculated because the world has been using the wrong calendar? Could this be why so many people have falsely predicted the second coming, because they're using a distorted timeline? And if that's true, was this change in timekeeping just an accident, or was it something more sinister? The Book of Jubilees doesn't just claim that humanity failed to follow the lunar calendar. It suggests that this shift was influenced by fallen beings, rebellious angels who wanted to lead humanity away from God's order. Think about it. If God created a perfect solar calendar, wouldn't his enemies want to corrupt it? If time itself reflects divine order, wouldn't altering it be one of the most effective ways to separate people from God's plan? If prophecy follows divine cycles, wouldn't shifting those cycles make it harder for people to recognize the truth? Jubilees warns that those who follow the moon will make errors and lose sight of God's sacred festivals. And yet even today, most of the world follows a system based on lunar cycles, irregular months, and shifting holy days. Coincidence? Or evidence of a deliberate effort to keep humanity from unlocking the actual timeline of biblical prophecy? And if fallen angels were behind this change, then the question becomes, did they succeed? Because if humanity has been operating on a distorted timeline for thousands of years, is it already too late to return to God's original system? Or is there still time to set things right before the final judgment? Now, here's where I want to hear from you. Do you think the corruption of time was an accident, or was it done on purpose? Could this be why so many prophecies seem off or miscalculated? If we returned to God's original 364-day calendar, could we unlock hidden truths about the end times? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. This is one of the most controversial topics in biblical history. And if you thought this was mind-blowing, wait until you see what's coming next. In the next section, we will uncover how angels, both righteous and fallen, have influenced human history in ways you've never imagined. Guardians of time, law, and divine secrets. If you think the Book of Jubilees is another lost text, think again. This book doesn't just retell biblical history, it reveals a hidden structure of the universe, a cosmic order where angels don't just serve God but actively shape reality. According to the Book of Jubilees, Angels directly govern time, divine law, and even humanity itself. And here's where it gets controversial, because these angels weren't just spiritual figures, they were the keepers of God's laws. But the real question is, what did they teach humanity that was so dangerous it had to be suppressed? And what do modern scholars say about these radical claims? Most people believe angels were created as messengers, warriors, or protectors of God's people. But Jubilees claims they were made on the first day of existence, before anything else in the universe. Their job? To maintain the cosmic order. The book describes three main classes of angels: angels of the presence, the highest-ranking angels standing directly before God, relaying His commands; angels of sanctification, those responsible for ensuring divine law was followed in heaven and on earth; guardian angels of time and creation. These angels controlled the movements of celestial bodies and ensured that time followed God's sacred design. This structure suggests that the fabric of time was under angelic control, and that by straying from divine timekeeping, humanity was unknowingly rebelling against God's created order. Dr. Lauren T. Stuckenbrook, a scholar of early Jewish and apocalyptic texts, discusses similar angelic hierarchies in his book, The Myth of Rebellious Angels, Studies in Second Temple Judaism and New Testament Texts. He argues that ancient Jewish thought envisioned angels as divine messengers and cosmic enforcers of God's will, tasked with overseeing celestial mechanics and holy law. Jubilees aligns with this view, presenting angels as the regulators of time and sacred rhythms, a belief that later faded from mainstream religious doctrine. But here's where things take an even darker turn. If the angels were meant to maintain divine order, then what happened? How did humanity lose this sacred structure? Jubilees explains that after Adam and Eve's fall, chaos entered creation, not just in human hearts, but in the very fabric of time itself. According to the book, the introduction of the lunar calendar and the rejection of God's solar system were not just human decisions, they were a direct result of spiritual corruption. The text claims, "All the children of Israel will forget and will not find the path of the years, and they will make an error as to the months and seasons and Sabbaths, and they will wrongly observe all the order of the years." Jubilees 6:34. This means that straying from God's timekeeping was no accident. It was part of humanity's rebellion. Dr. James C. Vanderkam, one of the leading scholars on the Book of Jubilees, expands on this idea in his book, The Book of Jubilees, Rewritten Bible, Redrawn World. Vanderkam argues that Jubilees presents a polemic against the lunar calendar, which various Jewish sects had widely adopted. He explains that the book's insistence on a 364-day solar calendar wasn't just about counting days, it was about spiritual purity. In Jubilees, timekeeping isn't just a practical concern, it's a cosmic battle between divine order and human corruption. And here's where things get even stranger. Jubilees also introduced a concept that would later become highly controversial in biblical history. Fallen angels introduced forbidden knowledge to mankind. This isn't a new concept. Genesis briefly mentions the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels and human women, but barely elaborates. The Book of Enoch, another banned text, gives more details. But Jubilees, it goes even further. It claims that fallen angels, led by a being named Mastema, a figure often associated with Satan, descended to earth and began corrupting mankind, not just through sin, but by teaching forbidden knowledge. This knowledge included magic and sorcery, secret arts that were never meant for human hands, war and weaponry, skills that led to endless bloodshed. The corruption of time, the introduction of the lunar calendar broke God's intended cycle of timekeeping. The book states, "They will go wrong as to the new moons and Sabbaths and festivals, and they will eat all kinds of blood with all kinds of flesh." Jubilees 6:38. The implication that by following a corrupted calendar, mankind had unknowingly fallen into spiritual rebellion. This wasn't just about miscounting days, it was about breaking divine law. Dr. Stuckenbrook's research also sheds light on this theme, emphasizing that early Jewish texts, including Jubilees, suggest that humanity's deviation from divine law was not simply a result of human error, but was actively caused by external malevolent forces. In other words, Jubilees presents history as a war over time, where fallen angels deliberately disrupted sacred rhythms to lead humanity astray. But what was the end goal of this corruption? Why would fallen angels care about altering the way humans measure time? According to the Book of Jubilees, time is directly tied to prophecy. The Book of Jubilees insists that every significant biblical event follows a divine timeline, and that by corrupting humanity's understanding of time, the fallen angels were trying to disrupt God's ultimate plan. The flood of Noah. It was foretold on the heavenly tablets, set to happen on a precise date. The exodus of Israel. The timing of their slavery and deliverance was preordained. The coming of the Messiah. The Book of Jubilees hints that even this was supposed to follow the sacred solar calendar. But if the world had abandoned correct timekeeping, could it be possible that even the timing of key prophetic events had been misunderstood? This is one of the Book of Jubilees' most radical claims, that restoring God's true calendar is necessary to fully understand prophecy and prepare for the end times. And if that's the case, then rejecting the Book of Jubilees wasn't just about controlling religious texts, it was about controlling time itself. But this is just the beginning of the mysteries surrounding this book. Because in addition to rewriting Genesis, the Book of Jubilees completely reinterprets the laws given to humanity. What it reveals about God's laws might just change everything we thought we knew about sin, salvation, and divine judgment. Did fallen angels try to erase God's laws? We've already uncovered how angels were responsible for keeping time, ensuring that the universe followed God's divine calendar. But what if I told you that fallen angels didn't just corrupt time, they also tried to erase God's laws? This is where things get incredibly controversial. Because according to the Book of Jubilees, the laws of God were written before time itself, and even the angels had to obey them. But if that's true, then why do so many religious traditions today teach that God's law is no longer necessary? Did fallen angels play a role in convincing humanity to abandon divine commandments? Or is it possible that God's laws were never meant to change in the first place? In modern Christianity, many believe that God's laws were given only to Israel and that Jesus' coming fulfilled or replaced them. But Jubilees tells an entirely different story. This book insists that God's laws were established at creation, not just at Mount Sinai. Adam, Noah, and Abraham followed divine commandments long before Moses. Even the angels follow these laws in heaven. Jubilees states, "And he gave him commandments and instructed him to observe them, but he transgressed and was driven forth from the garden." Jubilees 3:31. This means that when Adam sinned, he wasn't just breaking a simple rule, he was violating an eternal law that even the angels had to obey. But if that's true, then why do so many people believe that these laws were only for ancient Israel? And here's where the real controversy begins. If God's laws were universal, then something had to happen to make humanity forget them. According to the Book of Jubilees, the fallen angels played a direct role in this deception. This book states that after corrupting time, the Watchers, the same fallen angels who caused the flood, also began corrupting God's commandments. How? By introducing false religions, forbidden knowledge, and a new system of morality that was never part of God's original plan. Jubilees warns, "They will forget and will not find the path of the years, and they will wrongly observe all the order of the years." Jubilees 6:34-36. But here's the terrifying part. What if this wasn't just about time? What if this was also about convincing humanity that God's laws were no longer necessary? Think about it. If fallen angels corrupted time, could they have also corrupted how we understand sin and righteousness? If Adam, Noah, and Abraham followed God's commandments, why do modern traditions claim those laws no longer apply? If Jesus kept the laws of God, did he ever say they were abolished? Or was that something later traditions introduced? This is where the honest debate begins. If the Book of Jubilees is correct, then many religious teachings today might not come from God at all, but from the very fallen beings that tried to corrupt humanity from the start. And that leads to an even bigger question. If God's commandments were eternal, then what happened? Some believe God's laws were meant to evolve, adapting to different cultures and eras. Others argue that divine laws never change, only people do. But if we accept the claims of Jubilees, then the conclusion is clear. The fallen angels didn't just introduce sin into the world, they convinced humanity to abandon God's laws completely. And if that's true, then who benefits from people believing that God's commandments no longer matter? Are modern religious traditions part of a divine plan? Or have they been influenced by the same fallen spirits that led the world astray thousands of years ago? This is one of the most controversial claims in the Book of Jubilees, and it might explain why this book was banned in the first place. But what do you think? Were God's laws meant for everyone, for all time? Or did they change after Jesus' coming? Could fallen angels have played a role in deceiving humanity about divine law? Let's start the debate in the comments below. And now that we've uncovered the shocking possibility that fallen angels may have erased God's laws from history, let's move to the next section, where we reveal how these same beings may have shaped the world's religions. The forbidden commandments given to Adam and the Patriarchs. If the Book of Jubilees is correct, then the laws of God didn't begin with Moses. They didn't even start with Abraham. Instead, this ancient text claims that God's divine commandments were given to humanity from the beginning, starting with Adam himself. But here's where things get controversial. According to Jubilees, the 10 Commandments were not a new revelation to Israel. They were eternal laws written on the heavenly tablets long before Moses set foot on Mount Sinai. Not only were these laws in place from the start, but they were also taught to humanity by the angels. That's right, Jubilees says that Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Jacob followed the same commandments that would later be formalized in the law of Moses. But why would this information be suppressed? If these laws were genuinely eternal, then their observance wouldn't be just for the Israelites, it would be meant for all of humanity. And that single idea could thoroughly shake the foundation of religious traditions. According to Jubilees, God gave Adam specific commandments immediately after creation. These laws, delivered by the angels of the presence, included observing the Sabbath as a divine, eternal institution that even the angels kept. Purity laws, regulations on what could and couldn't be eaten. Marriage laws, they defined holy unions and rejected corruption. Sacrificial laws, yes, sacrifices were performed long before Moses. This means that divine laws have existed since the very beginning of human history, and all righteous people were expected to follow them. And Adam wasn't the only one. The Book of Jubilees states, And he gave him commandments and instructed him to observe them, but he transgressed and was driven forth from the garden. Jubilees 3:31. Adam's failure to keep these divine laws led to his exile from Eden. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. After the great flood, God re-established his covenant with Noah, but according to Jubilees, this covenant wasn't just about promising never to flood the earth again. It was about reaffirming the eternal laws that had existed since creation. These included the prohibition against consuming blood, is a law still in many biblical traditions today. Regulations for sacrifice and worship, reinforcing the idea that divine laws existed before Moses. A reaffirmation of the solar calendar, ensuring that timekeeping aligned with God's order. The Book of Jubilees suggests that Noah's descendants were supposed to continue following these sacred laws, but many rebelled, leading to the Tower of Babel and the scattering of nations. But things take an even more shocking turn when we get to Abraham. According to the mainstream biblical narrative, the law of Moses was explicitly given to the Israelites at Mount Sinai long after Abraham's time. But the Book of Jubilees tells a very different story. It claims that Abraham had already observed the commandments that would later be given to Moses, including the Sabbath, circumcision, and even purity laws. The text states, "And Abraham walked in the ways of the Lord, and observed his commandments and his ordinances and his judgments, and he taught them to his son Isaac." Jubilees 16:28. This means that the laws weren't new when they were given at Sinai. They were being restored after generations of corruption. And if that's true, then why was this knowledge removed from mainstream Christianity and Judaism? One possible reason is that it challenges the idea that God's commandments were given to just one group of people. Jubilees suggests that these laws were meant for all of humanity, but over time, different nations rejected them in favor of their traditions. And here's where things get even more controversial. One of the most unique claims in the Book of Jubilees is that God's laws were already written on the heavenly tablets long before they were given to humanity. These tablets, described as divine records stored in the heavenly realm, contain the Sabbath laws, which even the angels observe. The commandments and prohibitions were recorded before time itself. The destiny of nations, including the future exile and redemption of Israel. Jubilees states, "For this reason it is ordained and written in the heavenly tablets that they should celebrate the Feast of Weeks in this month once a year." Jubilees 6:17. In other words, the Mosaic Law was not just a set of cultural customs, but a reflection of divine laws already established in heaven. And here's the kicker, even the angels follow these laws. This means that when humanity rejects these laws, it is breaking alignment with the universe's divine order. But if all of this is true, why was the Book of Jubilees hidden away? Some scholars believe that early religious leaders suppressed this book because it suggested that the laws of God were not exclusive to any one group. If the laws were eternal, they applied to everyone, not just the Israelites. And this idea would have challenged centuries of religious tradition. But it doesn't stop there, because Jubilees doesn't just claim that the laws are eternal, it also claims that they were given in preparation for something even more significant, the end of days. And that's where things take a turn into the truly prophetic. The Book of Jubilees' chilling vision for the future. The Book of Jubilees doesn't just rewrite Genesis, it doesn't just reveal hidden laws, it goes even further, predicting the future of humanity in a way that's so unsettling it might explain why this book was buried for centuries. According to this ancient text, history isn't random. Every event, from Adam's fall to the Messiah's coming, has already been recorded on the heavenly tablets, a cosmic blueprint of divine prophecy. And here's where things get eerie. Jubilees claims that humanity's rebellion against God's laws, including the corruption of time, the rejection of divine commandments, and the rise of lawlessness, isn't just a mistake. It's part of a pattern that has been repeating since the beginning of time, and at the end of that pattern, a final judgment that will reshape the entire world. Jubilees reveals a disturbing cycle where humanity repeatedly falls away from divine law, suffers consequences, and then is given another chance to return to God's order. The book claims that nations have been led astray from the very beginning by fallen angels and corrupted spiritual influences. It describes the Tower of Babel as an act of global rebellion against God's divine order. Adopting lunar calendars was a spiritual deception that led people away from God's proper timekeeping system. The spread of lawlessness and false teachings are direct results of fallen angels corrupting human knowledge. And here's where things get prophetic. Jubilees states that every time humanity abandons God's laws, it triggers divine intervention, whether it's the flood of Noah, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the exile of Israel. But the final rebellion, that one is still coming. According to Jubilees, before the end of the world, there will be a significant increase in sin and rebellion against God's order. The text warns, "And after this, they will turn themselves away from following the Lord, and they will commit iniquity in all manner of ways, so that the Lord will be exceedingly wroth with them." Jubilees 23:16. It describes a time when people will reject divine laws, choosing corruption over righteousness. Nations will wage war without justice, causing mass destruction. The world will fall into chaos as the rejection of divine timekeeping leads to complete disorder. And here's where things get chilling. The Book of Jubilees claims that this final rebellion will trigger a divine reckoning unlike before, but something else will occur before that happens: a return to God's original order. Jubilees insists that a remnant of people will wake up to the truth before the final judgment. They will realize that the lunar calendar is corrupt and will return to God's solar timekeeping. The forgotten commandments must be restored, as they were never meant to be discarded. A remarkable purification will occur, where the righteous are set apart from the wicked. The text prophesies, "And they will begin to observe the years accurately, and the festivals, and the Sabbaths, and they will go wrong no more." Jubilees 6:32. Could this mean that before the end of days, the world will be given one last chance to return to God's original system? Many scholars believe this prophecy of restoration is one of the biggest reasons why the Book of Jubilees was suppressed. Because it doesn't just predict judgment, it suggests that many modern religious traditions have drifted away from their original divine purpose. And if that's true, then what else have we misunderstood? The most terrifying part of the Book of Jubilees. It claims that at the end of time, there will be a final separation where the righteous are gathered into God's kingdom and the wicked are destroyed forever. It describes this moment in haunting detail. "And the Lord will send his angels to gather his chosen, and they shall bind the prince of the evil spirits, casting him into the abyss until the time of judgment, when he shall be destroyed forever." Jubilees 23:29. This means that the fallen angels and their influence over humanity will be permanently removed. Those who kept God's laws will be rewarded, while the rebellious will face destruction. The world will be fully restored to the divine order it was always meant to have. And here's the most controversial part. Jubilees suggests that this judgment isn't just for humanity, it extends to the spiritual realm. The fallen angels, led by Mastema, a Satan-like figure in Jubilees, will be imprisoned and eventually destroyed. The war between good and evil, it will end once and for all, but only those who understand and follow the original divine order will make it through. And if Jubilees is correct, that divine order has been hidden from most of the world. But this raises an even bigger question. If the Book of Jubilees contains a hidden roadmap to the end of days, then why has it been ignored by most of Christianity? Why was it removed from the Bible? And who decided that its prophecies should be forgotten? The more we examine this ancient text, the more it seems that someone didn't want the world to know what was inside. The following section will uncover the shocking truth behind who banned the Book of Jubilees and why. Who banned the Book of Jubilees and why? The Book of Jubilees wasn't just lost. It was deliberately removed from most versions of the Bible. But who made that decision? And more importantly, why was this book considered so dangerous? The answer leads us deep into the power struggles of early Judaism and Christianity and the battle over which texts would define religious doctrine. Because the Book of Jubilees wasn't forgotten by accident, it was banned. And the reason for its removal might be one of the greatest cover-ups in biblical history. Before it was banned, the Book of Jubilees was widely respected in early Jewish communities. It was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggesting that groups like the Essenes considered Scripture sacred. However, by the 2nd century CE, mainstream Rabbinic Judaism had rejected Jubilees entirely. Why? One possible reason: Jubilees challenged evolving Jewish traditions by insisting that God's laws were eternal and unchangeable. Dr. James van der Kam, a leading scholar on the Book of Jubilees and author of the Book of Jubilees, 2001, explains, Jubilees presents an early form of Judaism that saw itself as maintaining the original divine commandments before later rabbinic interpretations altered them. One of the most significant disputes was the calendar issue. Jubilees strictly uphold a solar calendar, while Rabbinic Judaism later adopted a lunar calendar, which still determines the timing of Jewish holidays today. The book also promotes stricter laws on Sabbath observance and purity, which may have conflicted with evolving Jewish customs. When Rabbinic Judaism became dominant, Jubilees was seen as a threat that could challenge religious authority, so it was silenced. But the Jewish authorities weren't the only ones who removed it. Early Christians were aware of the Book of Jubilees, and some even quoted it. Yet, when the Christian canon was being finalized, Jubilees was left out. But why? Dr. Michael Siegel, author of The Book of Jubilees, Rewritten Bible, Redaction, Ideology and Theology, 2007, argues that Jubilees was problematic for early Christianity because of its emphasis on divine law. He writes, "The Book of Jubilees does not fit neatly into later Christian theology, particularly regarding the role of the law. It presents divine commandments as eternal, whereas early Christian teachings emphasized a new covenant that transcended the old law." This posed a huge theological problem for the early church. If Jubilees was correct, God's laws were never meant to change. If God's laws were eternal, Jesus' role in fulfilling the law had to be reinterpreted. If the law was eternal, why were Christians no longer observing the Sabbath as described in Jubilees? For early Christian leaders, allowing Jubilees into the canon would have forced them to explain why their traditions had deviated from these so-called eternal commandments. By removing it, they could ensure that only their version of biblical history remained. But an even bigger issue was at play, one that went beyond theology. One of the most controversial aspects of Jubilees is its rejection of the lunar calendar. According to this book, humanity was never supposed to follow a lunar system. Instead, time was meant to be measured by 364-day solar cycles, divided into perfect seasons, with holy days that never changed. Jubilees warns, those who follow the moon will go astray, corrupting the sacred festivals and losing their connection to God. Jubilees 6:36-37. But here's where history proves Jubilees was onto something. At some point, a shift happened in biblical timekeeping. The ancient Hebrew calendar eventually became lunar-based. Early Christianity later adopted a Roman-influenced calendar to calculate Easter. The modern world follows the Gregorian calendar, introduced by the Catholic Church. Could the Book of Jubilees be removed because it challenged this timekeeping shift? If so, then most of the world today operates on a system more that the Book of Jubilees warns against. But it gets even deeper. By removing the Book of Jubilees from the Bible, religious leaders ensured that its radical teachings wouldn't influence future generations. Because if people took Jubilees seriously, they would have to ask some dangerous questions. Are we following the wrong calendar? Did religious authorities alter timekeeping to fit their traditions? Has prophecy been misunderstood because time itself was changed? If Jubilees is correct, returning to God's accurate timekeeping system would be one of the most critical events in history, and yet that knowledge has been kept hidden for centuries. However, the most disturbing reason for its removal may not have been the law or time. It may have been about power. According to the Book of Jubilees, the real rulers of this world have been influencing humanity in unexpected ways. The Book of Jubilees doesn't just discuss history, it describes an invisible war between angelic forces that shaped mankind's destiny. It teaches that fallen angels corrupted human knowledge, altered divine law, and continue to influence world events. This is where Mastema, the prince of evil spirits, enters the story. Unlike the traditional Bible, which refers to Satan more abstractly, Jubilees names a specific leader of the fallen angels, Mastema. This fallen being has led humanity away from God's true laws, introduced false teachings to corrupt divine worship, fought to keep people enslaved to a broken timekeeping system, and the most terrifying part, Jubilees states that Mastema was allowed to remain on Earth to test and deceive mankind until the final judgment. That means the forces that led to Jubilees being banned might still be working behind the scenes today. So the real question is, if Jubilees was hidden to keep people from knowing the truth, then what happens when people start waking up? The next part of the Book of Jubilees doesn't just predict the future, it warns us about the final judgment. A judgment that is rapidly approaching, and in the next section, we're going to reveal the final prophecy of Jubilees, one that could expose the ultimate fate of the world. The ultimate fate of humanity and the war over time. We've uncovered the forbidden history. We've exposed the corruption of time. We've revealed the battle between angels and fallen spirits. And we've seen how the Book of Jubilees was deliberately erased from history. But now, we're left with one last question, the most important one of all. What happens next? According to the Book of Jubilees, the future is already written, and we are approaching the final phase of human history, a time when the righteous will awaken to the lost truths of the universe. The fallen will continue their rebellion, rejecting the original divine order. God will intervene one last time to reset time itself and restore creation. And if the Book of Jubilees is correct, we already see signs that this final reckoning is near. But this isn't just a theory. Scholars who have studied the Book of Jubilees have found unsettling connections between its prophecies and historical patterns that continue to unfold today. So let's break it down. One of the most mind-blowing ideas in the Book of Jubilees is that human history follows a preordained cycle. Jubilees divides time into Jubilee periods, each one lasting 49 years. And here's where things get chilling. The book claims that major biblical events, the flood, the Exodus, and the coming of the Messiah, were all scheduled according to these divine time cycles. This concept is not unique to Jubilees. In his book, God's Calendar and the Prophetic Timeline, Dr. Michael Heiser suggests that ancient biblical texts often frame historical events within structured, divinely appointed time cycles. He argues that Jubilees presents a hidden eschatological framework that aligns with the prophetic patterns in the Torah and later apocalyptic literature. If Heiser is correct, then humanity has unknowingly followed a prophetic clock that will eventually reach its final hour. And the most important part? Jubilees states that the final judgment will also happen on a preordained cycle. This means the rise and fall of empires have been happening on a divine schedule. The corruption of timekeeping was allowed to happen, leading up to a final reckoning. The world is being prepared for a great purification, one that will restore the lost order of creation. But there's something even more controversial here, because Jubilees doesn't just predict an ending, it predicts a return to the beginning. Unlike some apocalyptic texts that describe a world-ending catastrophe, the Book of Jubilees teaches that the end times will completely restore God's original design. Jubilees insists that before judgment comes, a righteous remnant will awaken to the truth and restore God's accurate timekeeping and commandments. The prophecy states, "And they will begin to observe the years accurately, and the festivals and the Sabbaths, and they will go wrong no more." Jubilees 6:32. Dr. Gabriele Boccaccini explores this idea of a return to sacred order in his book Beyond the Essene Hypothesis, The Parting of the Ways Between Qumran and Enochic Judaism. Boccaccini argues that Jubilees represents a radical vision of an apocalyptic future in which the faithful will return to a pure, divinely appointed system of worship, one corrupted by political and religious influences over time. This means that before the final reckoning, a group of people will rediscover the ancient divine calendar. They will reject false traditions and return to the laws written on the heavenly tablets. They will live in alignment with the divine order, preparing for the final battle between good and evil. But here's the most unsettling part. Jubilees suggests that most people resist this return to God's original order. And that resistance, it will lead directly to the final judgment. Jubilees describes a time when the world will be divided into two groups: those who return to God's original design and align with His laws, those who reject the truth and continue following a corrupted system. And this division won't just be about beliefs, it will be about destiny. This final separation echoes what Dr. James Vanderkam describes in his book, The Book of Jubilees, Rewritten Bible, Redacted Text, and Canon Formation. He explains that Jubilees presents an either-or eschatology, where people ultimately choose between obedience and rebellion, aligning with God's order or alliance with the forces of darkness. Jubilees warns that the final judgment will not be random. It will be a great purification, a separation of those aligned with God's eternal order and those rebelling against it. And at the time of judgment, the wicked will be cast into darkness, but the righteous will inherit the light forever. Jubilees 23:30. This prophecy echoes what many other apocalyptic texts describe, a moment when the righteous are gathered and the fallen are removed from creation forever. But there's something even more significant at play, because this isn't just about people, this is about the fate of the fallen angels themselves. Throughout Jubilees, we see the influence of Mastema, the prince of evil spirits who has led humanity astray for thousands of years. But according to the Book of Jubilees, his time is running out. The book prophesies that in the final days, Mastema and his spirits will be bound and cast into the abyss. They will no longer have power over humanity. The world will be freed from their deception forever. Jubilees states, "And the Lord will send his angels to gather his chosen, and they shall bind the prince of the evil spirits, casting him into the abyss until the time of judgment, when he shall be destroyed forever." Jubilees 23:29. This is one of the most significant moments in biblical prophecy. If the fallen angels had been influencing the world this entire time, their destruction would mark the complete restoration of divine order. And that leads us to the most mind-blowing revelation of all. Jubilees doesn't just predict the destruction of evil, they expect that time will be reset. Once the fallen are removed, the righteous will enter a new era, one in which time follows God's original design. "And the Lord will establish his kingdom on earth, and the righteous shall rule with him, for the law shall be written on their hearts, and the wicked shall be no more." Jubilees 50:13. This isn't just the end of the world. It's a new beginning, how things were always meant to be. And in the next section, we'll uncover the ultimate revelation, why the Book of Jubilees was indeed banned, and what it means for us today. The real reason the Book of Jubilees was banned. We've uncovered the forbidden history. We've exposed the corruption of time. We've revealed the battle between angels and fallen spirits. And we've seen how the Book of Jubilees was deliberately erased from history. But now we're left with one last question, the most important one of all. Why was the Book of Jubilees truly banned? Most religious scholars will tell you that Jubilees was removed from the Bible simply because later religious authorities did not consider it inspired. But let's be honest, if this book was just another historical text, why would it be deliberately erased from mainstream Christianity and Judaism? Why did the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserve it while almost everyone else buried it? And why does it contain prophecies, cosmic laws, and timekeeping secrets that challenge everything we know about biblical history? The truth is, this book was dangerous because it exposed something powerful, something that could shake the very foundation of modern religious traditions. And here's what it all comes down to. First, Jubilees proves that God's laws are eternal. One of the most controversial claims in Jubilees is that God's commandments were not first given to Moses. They existed from the beginning of creation. This means that the Sabbath was kept by Adam, Noah, and Abraham. The dietary laws were observed before Israel even became a nation. The 10 Commandments weren't just for the Israelites. They were universal laws written into creation itself. Dr. Michael Siegel, a leading expert in Second Temple literature and author of the Book of Jubilees, Rewritten Bible, Redaction, Ideology and Theology, explains that the pre-Mosaic nature of divine law in Jubilees was a direct challenge to rabbinic and Christian interpretations of legal history. The idea that the law was established before Israel's covenant at Sinai undermined the belief that Moses was the first recipient of divine commandments. Siegel writes, "Jubilees presents a radical alternative history of biblical law, one that places the commandments as part of the divine fabric of creation itself, rather than a later development in the covenantal history of Israel." Such a position was not only theologically dangerous, but politically disruptive. This alone would have removed the book from the Jewish and Christian canon. If God's laws were universal, that meant the distinction between Jews and Gentiles in religious observance may have been a later human creation rather than a divine decree. Dr. John C. Reeves, an expert in Jewish apocalyptic literature and author of Tracing the Threads, Studies in the Vitality of Jewish Pseudepigrapha, argues that the Book of Jubilees was viewed as a threat because it framed God's law as eternal and unchangeable, rather than something that could be revised or reinterpreted over time. Reeves writes, "Jubilees represents a rigid theological stance in which divine law is immutable. This directly conflicted with later rabbinic Judaism, which emphasized evolving interpretations of the Torah, as well as early Christianity, which viewed the law as being fulfilled or transcended in Christ." In other words, the reason Jubilees was banned wasn't just because of its content, it was because it left no room for human modification of divine law. Second Jubilees exposes the corruption of time. The Book of Jubilees insists that God established a 364-day solar calendar that humanity later abandoned. This poses a direct challenge to the Jewish lunar calendar and the later Christian adaptation of the Roman calendar. Dr. Jonathan Ben-Dov, an expert on ancient Jewish calendrical texts and author of Head of All Years, Astronomy and Calendars at Qumran in their ancient context, argues that the calendar war was one of the primary reasons Jubilees was suppressed. He explains, "The Qumran community preserved Jubilees because it upheld a calendar that was distinct from the later rabbinic system. The shift from a solar to a lunar calendar was not merely an adjustment, it was a theological and ideological shift that created religious division." Ben-Dov further explains that timekeeping was a form of religious control. Those who determined the calendar also controlled when festivals were celebrated, sacrifices were made, and religious observances took place. If Jubilees was right, most Jewish and Christian traditions had been operating on the wrong calendar for centuries. Banning Jubilees ensured that later religious authorities maintained power over time. Third Jubilees reveals the battle between angels and fallen beings. Another reason this book might have been hidden is that it doesn't just talk about Satan. It introduces Mastema, a powerful fallen angel who has been actively working to corrupt humanity and lead people astray. Dr. Lauren Stuckenbrook, a specialist in ancient angelology and author of The Myth of Rebellious Angels, studies in Second Temple Judaism and New Testament texts, suggests that Jubilees' depiction of angelic warfare was too radical for mainstream religious authorities. He explains, "Jubilees does not depict evil as a mere abstract force or temptation. It portrays it as an organized rebellion within the divine realm. The figure of Mastema provides an alternative Satanology that may have conflicted with evolving Christian and Jewish traditions." Stuckenbrook's research suggests that the Book of Jubilees was removed partly to suppress its radical angelology, which presented an ongoing war between good and evil forces operating in the heavenly realm. Dr. Hindi Najman, a scholar of ancient Jewish literature and author of Losing the Temple and Recovering the Future, an analysis of 4 Ezra, explains that Jubilees was controversial because it depicted history as a battleground between angelic forces, a view that many later religious traditions sought to downplay. Najman states, "The battle between divine and rebellious angels in Jubilees presents a cosmic drama that was too deterministic for later Jewish and Christian theology, which preferred human moral responsibility as the primary driver of history." This means that Jubilees wasn't just removed because it discussed angels. It was removed because it framed human history as part of a larger cosmic battle, one that people were largely unaware of. Fourth Jubilees prophesies a coming reckoning. Jubilees doesn't just describe the past, it predicts the future. Jubilees describes a final period of lawlessness where humanity will reject God's original design. A remnant of people who will rediscover the truth and return to the original commandments. A great judgment where the fallen angels, including Mastema, will be permanently destroyed. And if this prophecy is true, then we are living in the final phase of human history. So, was the Book of Jubilees removed because it was uninspired? Or was it removed because it exposed something too powerful for religious authorities to allow? Here's what we know. It was widely respected in ancient Judaism and early Christianity. It was preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, but erased elsewhere. It contains radical ideas that challenge mainstream religious traditions. It describes a battle over time that humanity may have already lost. And here's the final question. If Jubilees was hidden to keep people from knowing the truth, then what else has been suppressed? Was the Book of Jubilees suppressed to hide a hidden prophecy? We now know that the Book of Jubilees was banned because it challenged religious traditions, exposed time corruption, and revealed a cosmic battle between angels and fallen beings. But what if there's something even bigger hidden inside this book? Something so dangerous and world-altering that it had to be completely erased from history? Because there's one last theory that we haven't talked about yet, one that could change everything we think we know about the Bible, history, and the future of humanity. And if this theory is true, then banning the Book of Jubilees wasn't just about controlling religious doctrine. It was about controlling reality itself. Did the Book of Jubilees contain a timeline for the end of the world? Jubilees teaches that history follows a divine pattern, a cycle of 49-year jubilees that lead to key prophetic events. And here's where it gets terrifying. Some scholars believe that Jubilees might have initially contained an exact timeline for the end of days. A prophecy that was so precise it predicted the exact time the Messiah would appear. The timeline of global events leading up to the final judgment. The exact year the world would be purified and time would be reset. But here's where things get strange. Many researchers believe that certain portions of the Book of Jubilees are missing, as if someone deliberately removed them. Could these missing sections have contained a countdown to the final reckoning? And if so, who removed them? Could it be that powerful religious institutions, realizing this book contained a prophecy too dangerous to reveal, erased it from history to keep people in the dark? And if so, how close are we to the final cycle? Now here's where this theory takes an even wilder turn. Jubilees speaks about restoring God's divine order before the final judgment. And if that's true, many believe that the return of the Messiah would be tied to restoring the correct timekeeping system. But here's the problem. Most of the world is still following the corrupted lunar calendar. Which means, are we delaying the return of the Messiah by continuing to follow an incorrect system of time? Would humanity have to collectively reset time to trigger the final phase? Did banning the Book of Jubilees prevent people from knowing the exact conditions for the Messiah's return? This theory is one of the most controversial interpretations of Jubilees. If true, it means that humanity has been operating under an altered timeline for centuries, and that the world's biggest religions may have unknowingly contributed to the delay of prophecy, and if time is finally running out. Who is in control of what happens next? If the Book of Jubilees contained a countdown to the final days, then its removal from religious texts wasn't just about doctrine, but about controlling the flow of history itself. And if it did predict the return of the Messiah, then someone, somewhere, didn't want the world to know. But the bigger question is, if we returned to the divine timekeeping system, would prophecy unfold faster? Have we been unknowingly delaying the final judgment? And if the timeline is already written, are we in control of our fate? Because according to the Book of Jubilees, time was meant to follow God's design, not ours. So what happens if the world refuses to return to His order? Does the final judgment happen anyway? Or do we reach a point where prophecy has been altered beyond recognition? This is one of the most controversial theories surrounding the Book of Jubilees. And now, I want to hear from you. Was the Book of Jubilees removed to suppress an end-times prophecy? Could timekeeping be the key to unlocking the Messiah's return? And if humanity is still following a corrupted system, what happens next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your theories. If you think this information should be shared, hit the like button and send this video to someone who needs to see it. Because the final mystery of the Book of Jubilees? It's still unfolding. Because if this book was hidden for centuries, then what happens now that people are finally discovering it again? Could this be the moment the countdown begins? Has the final countdown already begun? We've uncovered the secrets of the Book of Jubilees. We've seen how it challenges everything we thought we knew about time, law, angels, and the final judgment. We've exposed how religious institutions buried it to maintain their control over history. But here's what no one wants to admit. The final countdown may have already begun. The Book of Jubilees wasn't just banned because it contradicted mainstream religious traditions. It was banned because it exposed the endgame. It laid out the exact events that would lead to humanity's last chance to return to God's original plan. And according to its timeline, we are now in the final phase. If the Book of Jubilees is correct, then the world we live in today is not aligned with God's original design. The manipulation of time, the suppression of divine laws, and the distortion of angelic history were not random events. They were intentional. Think about it. The lunar calendar replaced the solar system established by God. The true commandments were rewritten or ignored by later religious leaders. The very concept of evil was sanitized, turning a cosmic battle between divine and fallen beings into an abstract struggle of morality. Religious institutions, governments, and even modern educational systems have all kept people distracted from the truth. They made sure no one asked the one question that could unravel the entire system. If we follow a corrupted timeline, are we already past the point of no return? The Book of Jubilees suggests that time will be corrected in the final days. The distorted calendar, false traditions, and laws introduced by fallen beings will be erased. And in the final days, those who walk in righteousness will be returned to the true time, and the wicked will be cast into darkness. Jubilees 23:30. But here's the question: who will be allowed to transition into this new era? If the fallen angels have spent thousands of years corrupting the natural order, wouldn't they do everything they can to prevent people from escaping their influence? And what if those who resist the correction of time are deemed unworthy to enter God's renewed creation? Could this be why we see a global push for increased control over time, history, and consciousness? Governments are rewriting history books. Artificial intelligence is reshaping human understanding of truth. The concept of absolute morality is being erased in favor of relativism. What if this is part of a final, desperate attempt to prevent the awakening that the Book of Jubilees foretold? If the Book of Jubilees is so dangerous, who wanted it erased? Was it merely religious authorities, or was a more profound force at work? Many scholars have suggested that a hidden elite has been operating for millennia behind the banning of ancient texts. This group, whether human, spiritual, or something else entirely, has worked to suppress any knowledge that could threaten its power. And the wicked will seek to erase the records of the righteous so that none will remember the ancient ways. Jubilees 23:27. This raises a terrifying question. Is the Book of Jubilees proof that an ancient war for control over human destiny has been playing out in the shadows? And if so, what happens when people start waking up? The fact that you're reading this now means one thing: you are no longer under their control. The elites, the institutions, and the hidden powers that buried this book never wanted you to know any of this. They counted on you blindly accepting the timeline they constructed. They assumed that by removing the Book of Jubilees, no one would ever question the real history of the world. But now, the truth is out, and here's the most shocking part. The Book of Jubilees says the final phase begins once the lost knowledge is revealed. And when the knowledge of the ancient ways returns, the days of the wicked will be numbered, and the great judgment shall come. Jubilees 50:13. If this prophecy is correct, then the suppression of this book has already failed. People are waking up. The lost knowledge is resurfacing. The final battle between the righteous and the fallen is about to unfold. And the question is, which side will you be on? This is where you have to make a choice. You can return to the comfortable reality they've given you. You can tell yourself that this is just another conspiracy theory, that time is exactly as they say it is, that history has unfolded exactly as they've taught you. Or you can start looking deeper. You can ask yourself, why was this book removed? Who benefits from hiding the truth? What happens if I break free from the system and seek the original divine order? If the Book of Jubilees is correct, we are in the final cycle before the Great Restoration. And that means time is running out. If you've made it this far, something inside of you is stirring. You know there is more to history, time, and reality than what we've been told. Do you know what you are going to do about it? This knowledge was never supposed to reach you, but now it has, and that means you're faced with a decision that will define your fate. Because according to the Book of Jubilees, when the lost knowledge is revealed, the final countdown begins. If you found this information valuable, do not keep it to yourself. The best way to fight against hidden knowledge is to expose it. Share this video with others who need to wake up. And if you're ready to go deeper, watch our next video. The Book of Enoch, the secrets they didn't want you to know. I look forward to seeing you there.